After leaving behind a painful past, Emily Harper and her 10-year-old son, Lucas, arrive in the small town of Willow Creek, hoping to rebuild their lives in an old Victorian house. At first glance, the house seems like a perfect chance for a fresh start, quiet, spacious, and full of potential. But as the nights grow longer, Emily and Lucas begin hearing faint whispers in the walls, calling out with a desperation that sends chills through the house. The whispers lead Emily to uncover a dark and tragic history. Decades ago, a young girl named Anna vanished, and her devoted caretaker, Lily, mysteriously disappeared while trying to save her. Through letters, hidden compartments, and long-buried secrets, Emily pieces together a heartbreaking tale of abandonment and love and realizes that the voices haunting the house are tied to unfinished business that only she can resolve. As Emily digs deeper, the boundaries between past and present blur. With her son's safety at stake and the lingering presence of Anna and Lily growing stronger, Emily faces a choice: ignore the whispers and risk being consumed by the house's history, or confront the truth and bring peace to the restless spirits within its walls. Will Emily's determination and the unexpected kindness of her new community be enough to uncover the secrets and transform the house into the home she and Lucas so desperately need? Or will the shadows of the past prove too heavy to overcome? Emily Harper tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she guided her old sedan along the winding road into Willow Creek. Beside her, Lucas, her 10-year-old son, pressed his nose against the window, eyes wide as he watched the scenery shift from the bustle of city life to quiet, open spaces lined with towering oaks. It had been a long drive, filled with silence broken only by the occasional directions from her phone. Emily's heart ached with the weight of their decision, yet a flicker of hope burned faintly beneath her exhaustion. "Mom," Lucas said, his voice breaking the quiet. "Is this it? Is this our new town?" Emily glanced at him, his expression a mix of curiosity and hesitation. She nodded, mustering a small smile. "Yes, sweetie. This is Willow Creek. Our new start." Lucas didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting back to the landscape. The narrow streets of the town soon came into view, lined with small shops, a single gas station, and a cafe with a hand-painted sign that read Hearth and Brew. The town seemed untouched by time, quaint and simple. Emily turned down a side street, her heart pounding as they neared their destination. The old Victorian house appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac, standing tall amidst overgrown grass and leafless trees. Its faded blue paint and sagging porch betrayed years of neglect, but something about it felt oddly welcoming, as if it had been waiting for them. "We're here," Emily announced softly, more to herself than Lucas. Lucas stared at the house, his brows furrowed. "It looks old," he said hesitantly. Emily sighed, parking the car and stepping out. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. She leaned down to meet Lucas's gaze as he climbed out of the car. "It does need a little work," she admitted, "but it's ours. This is where we'll make a new life." Lucas nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Inside, the house was just as she expected, dusty, cold, and quiet. The floors creaked under their steps as they explored. The living room had a large, empty fireplace. The kitchen smelled faintly of mildew, and the staircase wobbled slightly when Lucas ran up to claim his bedroom. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, turning slowly to take in her surroundings. She could still hear the echoes of arguments from her old life, the years of trying to hold things together for Lucas's sake. Leaving had been the hardest choice she'd ever made, but staying would have destroyed them both. Now, as she faced the challenges of this new chapter, she wondered if she was strong enough to make it work. "Mom, my room is huge," Lucas's voice called from upstairs, pulling her from her thoughts. "That's great, honey," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. She spent the rest of the day unpacking their essentials, trying to bring some warmth to the cold, empty space. Lucas helped, his initial hesitance giving way to curiosity as he explored the house. By evening, they managed to set up a small dining area with a folding table and 2 mismatched chairs. Emily prepared a simple dinner of sandwiches and soup, grateful for the small comforts. As they ate, Lucas glanced toward the dark hallway leading to the stairs. "Mom, do you think this house is haunted?" he asked, his tone half serious. Emily chuckled, though her own unease lingered. "No, I don't think so. It's just old. Old houses make noises sometimes." Lucas seemed satisfied with her answer, but later that night, as she lay in her own bed, Emily heard it too, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind slipping through the cracks in the window, but as she held her breath and listened, the sound grew clearer. It was soft, fleeting, like the rustle of fabric or the murmur of a distant voice. Her pulse quickened as she sat up, scanning the room. The house was silent now, the sound gone as quickly as it had come. Shaking her head, she chalked it up to her imagination, the result of exhaustion and stress. The next morning, Emily stood on the porch, staring at the neglected yard. She pushed her doubts aside and rolled up her sleeves, determined to make this house feel like home. As she began pulling weeds, an elderly woman appeared on the sidewalk, a warm smile spreading across her face. "You must be the new neighbors," the woman said, approaching slowly. Emily straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Yes, we just moved in yesterday. I'm Emily, and this is my son, Lucas." The woman nodded kindly. "I'm Mrs. Palmer. Lived next door for 30 years. Welcome to Willow Creek." "Thank you," Emily replied, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Mrs. Palmer gestured to the house. "That's a sturdy old place, though it's been empty for a while. Folks around here say it has a bit of a history, but don't let that worry you." Emily frowned. "History?" Mrs. Palmer waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, just stories. Nothing to fret about. If you need anything, dear, don't hesitate to knock. I'll bring over some supper later. You've got enough on your plate." Emily was caught off guard by the offer. "That's very kind of you." "Thank you." True to her word, Mrs. Palmer arrived later with a casserole, its aroma filling the kitchen with warmth. Emily invited her to sit, and the two women chatted as Lucas wandered outside to explore. Mrs. Palmer spoke fondly of the town and shared stories of her late husband, her voice tinged with a quiet strength that Emily admired. "You've been through a lot," Mrs. Palmer said gently, her gaze meeting Emily's. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "I have, but I'm trying to move forward. For Lucas." Mrs. Palmer patted her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Emily. This town has a way of healing wounds. Give it time." After Mrs. Palmer left, Emily sat in the quiet kitchen, her heart lighter than it had been in months. That night, as Lucas drifted off to sleep, Emily stood by his door, watching him. His face was peaceful, free from the worries she had seen too often. She silently vowed to protect him, to make this new life work no matter the cost. As she turned to head back to her own room, the whispering returned. This time it was unmistakable. It seemed to come from the walls, faint yet deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to speak. Emily froze, her breath hitching. "Hello," she whispered into the silence, feeling foolish. The sound stopped, leaving only the creak of the old floorboards beneath her feet. She stood there for several minutes, her heart pounding, before retreating to her room. Lying in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the house was holding a secret, something waiting to be uncovered. But for now, she would focus on the simple things one day at a time. The morning sun poured through the warped glass of the kitchen window, casting soft streaks of light across the worn countertop. Emily sipped her coffee slowly, trying to shake the lingering unease from the whispers she'd heard the night before. She glanced at Lucas, who was hunched over a bowl of cereal, swinging his legs under the chair. He seemed happy, blissfully unaware of her late-night fears. "Ready for your first day exploring the new neighborhood?" she asked, masking her own uncertainty with a cheerful tone. Lucas grinned. "Can I ride my bike later? There's a big hill at the end of the street." Emily hesitated. The hill he described was steep and lined with gnarled trees, but she couldn't bring herself to dim his excitement. "Just be careful," she said, her voice firm but gentle. After breakfast, Emily started tidying the living room, unpacking boxes and wiping dust from the mantel. The old house had a charm she couldn't deny, even if it felt a bit lonely. She was lost in thought when there was a knock at the door. "Coming," she called, brushing her hands on her jeans. Opening the door, she found Mrs. Palmer standing on the porch, a wicker basket in hand. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Palmer greeted warmly. "I thought I'd bring over a few things from my garden. Fresh herbs and some tomatoes, much better than anything from the store." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to kindness without strings attached. "Thank you, Mrs. Palmer. That's so thoughtful." Mrs. Palmer stepped inside, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Looks like you've got your hands full. You're making good progress, though. How's Lucas settling in?" Emily smiled faintly. "He's adjusting. I think he likes having so much space to explore." As they talked, Mrs. Palmer began to help Emily unpack, her chatter filling the silence that had hung heavy in the house. Emily found herself opening up about her decision to move, careful not to reveal too much about the pain they'd left behind. "I just wanted a fresh start," Emily said, arranging books on a shelf. "Somewhere quiet, where Lucas could feel safe." "You chose the right town," Mrs. Palmer replied. "Willow Creek has a way of embracing people who need it. And that house of yours, well, it has its quirks, but it's a good place. It just needs love, like any home." Emily glanced at Mrs. Palmer, wondering if the older woman knew more about the house's history than she let on. But before she could ask, Lucas came bounding into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, there's a kid outside. He wants to know if I can come play." Emily followed him to the door, where a boy about Lucas's age stood with a soccer ball tucked under his arm. He had a mop of brown hair and a friendly smile. "Im Sam. I live 2 streets over," the boy said. Emily exchanged a glance with Lucas, who was practically bouncing on his toes. "That's nice of you, Sam. Lucas would love to play. Just stay where I can see you, okay?" Lucas and Sam raced off, their laughter echoing down the street. Emily stood on the porch for a moment, watching them kick the ball back and forth, before returning to Mrs. Palmer. "Looks like Lucas found a friend already," Emily said, feeling a flicker of relief. Mrs. Palmer chuckled. "Sam's a good boy. His father, David, is a handyman, does work around town. Nice family." The day passed quickly, with Mrs. Palmer's help making the house feel a little more like home. By the time evening arrived, Emily felt a rare sense of accomplishment. That night, as the house settled into silence, the whispers returned. Emily was sitting in the kitchen, flipping through an old cookbook Mrs. Palmer had loaned her, when she heard it again, soft, fleeting, like the rustle of leaves on a still night. Her pulse quickened. This time, it didn't seem to come from the walls, but from somewhere deeper in the house. She set the book down and stood, straining to pinpoint the sound. "Mom!" Lucas's voice startled her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. "Lucas, what are you doing up? It's late." "I heard it again," he said, his voice small. "The whispers." Emily froze. "You heard them too?" Lucas nodded. "They said something this time. I think it was a name." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "What name?" "I don't know," Lucas admitted, frowning. It was too quiet. Emily knelt in front of him, smoothing his hair. "It's probably just the house settling, like I said. Old houses make all kinds of noises. But if it happens again, you come get me right away, okay?" "Okay, Mom," Lucas said, though he didn't look convinced. Emily tucked him back in a bed and sat beside him until he fell asleep. She stayed awake long after, listening for the whispers, but the house remained quiet. The next morning, Emily decided to push her unease aside and focus on moving forward. She wanted to learn more about the house, hoping the knowledge might help her understand the strange occurrences. She walked into town with Lucas, who was eager to show her the small library Sam had introduced him to. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old books. Emily approached the librarian, a bespectacled woman with a kind smile. "Hi, I'm new in town," Emily began. "I just moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. I was wondering if there's any history about it here." The librarian's expression shifted slightly, though she maintained her smile. "That's an interesting house. It's been empty for quite some time. Let me check the archives and see what I can find." While the librarian searched, Emily browsed the shelves, her fingers brushing the spines of books. She felt a tug of familiarity, as if she were reconnecting with a part of herself she'd forgotten. "Mom, look what I found!" Lucas's voice interrupted her thoughts. He held up a worn children's book, the title faded but still legible. The Secret Room. Emily smiled. That looks like a good one. Why don't you borrow it? Lucas nodded enthusiastically, clutching the book as if it were treasure. When they returned to the desk, the librarian handed Emily a slim folder. This is what I could find. Mostly newspaper clippings and a few public records. I hope it's helpful. Thank you, Emily said sincerely. That evening, after Lucas went to bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder. The articles painted a vague but unsettling picture. The house had been owned by a family decade ago, but they left suddenly under mysterious circumstances. One article mentioned a young girl named Anna, who had reportedly gone missing shortly before the family moved. Emily's chest tightened as she read. The name felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. Closing the folder, she glanced toward the hallway, where the shadows seemed to linger just a little too long. Anna, she murmured, the name barely audible. Somewhere in the house, the floor creaked softly, as if in response. Emily shivered and closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Whatever the house was hiding, she would uncover it, but first, she needed to protect Lucas. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow, she would ask Mrs. Palmer what she knew about Anna. Emily woke early the next morning, a restless energy propelling her out of bed. The faint whispers from the night before still echoed in her mind, blending uneasily with the name she'd read in the old articles. Anna. She glanced toward Lucas's room as she passed in the hallway. His soft snores brought a small measure of comfort. Downstairs, the kitchen was still and quiet, the morning light casting long shadows on the floor. Emily sipped her coffee and stared at the folder she had left on the counter, its contents now burned into her thoughts. Who was Anna, and what had happened in this house? The silence was broken by Lucas bounding into the room, still in his pajamas, clutching the book he had borrowed from the library. "Mom, look," he said, flipping the book open to a page with a hand-drawn illustration of a secret door hidden behind a bookshelf. "Do you think there's something like this in our house?" Emily forced a smile. "Maybe. It's an old house. Who knows what it might be hiding?" Lucas's face lit up, and he darted toward the living room. "I'm going to look. Breakfast first," Emily called, her tone light but firm. After a quick meal, Lucas resumed his exploration, running his hands along the walls and peering behind furniture. Emily watched him, torn between amusement at his enthusiasm and unease at how close his imagination felt to reality. "Careful with the bookshelves," she warned as he began tugging on the edges of the one near the fireplace. Lucas grinned. "I'm just checking for a secret passage." The morning passed in a blur of unpacking and tidying. Emily kept herself busy, but her mind kept wandering to the whispers and the strange sense of familiarity she felt with the house. By midday, Emily found herself standing on Mrs. Palmer's porch, the crisp folder clutched tightly in her hands. She knocked softly, the door opening almost immediately. "Emily, dear," Mrs. Palmer greeted her warmly. "Come in, come in." Emily stepped inside, the cozy interior a stark contrast to the drafty old house she and Lucas were calling home. "I hope I'm not intruding," Emily began, sitting at the small kitchen table. I found some information about the house. There's something I wanted to ask you." Mrs. Palmer's expression shifted slightly, her usual cheer giving way to a more serious demeanor. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated, then pulled the folder onto the table and opened it to the article mentioning Anna. "Do you know anything about this? About what happened to the family who lived there before?" Mrs. Palmer studied the article for a moment, her lips pressing into a thin line. She sighed deeply. "I thought this might come up," she admitted. "Yes, I know about Anna. The poor child went missing years ago. It was a terrible time for the family. They left shortly after, couldn't bear to stay in that house." "What happened to her?" Emily asked, her voice low. "No one knows for sure," Mrs. Palmer replied. "Some people think she ran away. Others believe something more sinister happened. The house was searched thoroughly, but no trace of her was ever found." Emily's stomach turned. "Do you think the whispers?" She stopped herself, unsure of how to continue. Mrs. Palmer tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Whispers?" Emily hesitated, then decided to tell her the truth. At night, I've been hearing these faint whispers. Lucas says he's heard them too. It's almost like someone's trying to say something. Mrs. Palmer didn't respond immediately. Her hands folded neatly on the table. She studied Emily with a mixture of concern and curiosity. I don't know what to make of that, she said finally. But sometimes, old houses have a way of holding onto their stories. The word sent a chill through Emily, but she forced a smile and thanked Mrs. Palmer for her time. As she walked back to her house, Lucas ran to meet her at the door, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, I think I found something," he exclaimed, grabbing her hand and pulling her into the living room. Lucas led her to the bookshelf near the fireplace, where he pointed to a small gap in the wood. "Look, there's something behind it," he said eagerly. Emily crouched down, peering into the gap. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a faint glimmer of metal tucked inside the wall. She reached in carefully, her fingers brushing against something cool and solid. Pulling it free, she found herself holding a delicate locket, tarnished with age but still intact. It was engraved with the initials AR. Lucas's eyes widened. "Do you think it belonged to Anna?" Emily turned the locket over in her hands, her pulse quickening. "Maybe. It's possible." Lucas beamed, clearly thrilled by the discovery. "See, Mom? The house does have secrets." Emily couldn't deny it. She pocketed the locket and decided to clean it later, a part of her uneasy about what else they might uncover. That evening, after Lucas went to bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table, the locket resting in front of her. She had cleaned it gently, revealing a tiny clasp that opened to reveal a faded photograph inside. The image was of a young girl with dark hair, her eyes bright with mischief. Emily stared at it for a long time, the face strangely familiar despite never having seen it before. As she sat there, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder, clearer, forming fragmented words that sent a chill down her spine. "Help me!" Emily's breath hitched, her hand trembling as she reached for the locket. "Anna," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving the house in eerie silence. Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. The house was holding on to a secret, and she was determined to uncover it. As she finally made her way to bed, she glanced at Lucas's room, her resolve hardening. Whatever this mystery was, she would protect him from it. For now, she would focus on small steps. Tomorrow, she decided, she would show the locket to Mrs. Palmer and see if it jogged any memories. Whatever Anna's story was, Emily had a feeling it was far from over. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the kind of weather that matched Emily's unsettled mood. She stood at the kitchen sink, washing the tarnished locket under a thin stream of water, her thoughts swirling. The faded photograph of Anna lingered in her mind, and she couldn't shake the sensation that the whispers from last night had been real, desperate and pleading. Lucas bounded into the kitchen, his bright energy contrasting with the somber atmosphere. "Mom, are we going to investigate more today? I want to find out everything." Emily forced a smile. "We'll see, honey. For now, finish your breakfast." She knew Lucas's excitement was fueled by his imagination, but for her, this wasn't a game. There was something tangible, something deeply unsettling about what they'd found. After dropping Lucas off at Sam's house to play, Emily decided it was time to confront the mysteries of her new home head-on. She slipped the locket into her pocket and made her way to the attic, the only place in the house she hadn't fully explored. The attic was dim and musty, its air thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. Emily hesitated at the top of the stairs, her hand resting on the doorframe. The space felt heavy, as if it held the weight of years of forgotten stories. She stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under her weight. Sunlight filtered through a single, grimy window, illuminating cobwebs draped over forgotten trunks and boxes. Emily scanned the room, her gaze landing on an old, ornate trunk tucked into the far corner. The trunk was locked, its brass clasp tarnished but sturdy. Emily knelt in front of it, her fingers brushing over the intricate carvings on the lid. Something about it felt significant, as if it held answers she hadn't even thought to ask. She reached in her pocket and pulled out the locket. Turning it over, she noticed a small keyhole on the back, one she hadn't paid attention to before. Her heart quickened as she tried the locket's tiny key on the trunk's lock. It fit. The lock clicked open, and Emily lifted the lid, revealing a collection of items that seemed frozen in time. There were faded letters, a child's stuffed bear with one button eye missing, and a small notebook bound in cracked leather. Emily picked up the notebook, her hands trembling. She opened it to the first page, the handwriting neat but hurried. Property of Anna Rosewood. As Emily flipped through the pages, her breath caught. The entries were short, written in the tone of a child's diary. They described daily life in the house, playing in the garden, hiding from storms in the attic, and whispering secrets to the walls. One entry, however, stopped her cold. October 18th. I hear them at night. The whispers. They say my name. I'm not scared. I think they want to be my friend. But Mama says not to tell anyone. She says we need to keep the house happy. Emily's heart raced as she read on. The later entries grew fragmented, darker. Anna wrote of feeling watched, of hearing the whispers more often, and of her parents growing increasingly tense. November 2nd. Mama and Papa are fighting. They say the house is angry. They don't listen when I tell them. The whispers just want to talk. The final entry was brief, the handwriting shaky. November 10th. They're sending me to the attic to hide. They say it's the only way to make things better. I don't want to go. Emily closed the notebook, her hands trembling. She felt a knot of fear and sadness tighten in her chest. Had Anna been left here, abandoned like a secret the family was too afraid to face? The air in the attic seemed to shift, growing heavier. Emily felt a chill crawl down her spine, and for the first time, she questioned whether she was truly alone in the house. That afternoon, Emily sat in Mrs. Palmer's kitchen, the notebook and locket placed carefully on the table. Mrs. Palmer's expression was grim as she flipped through the diary's pages, her lips pressed tightly together. I remember the Rosewoods, Mrs. Palmer said finally. They were troubled. Mr. Rosewood was always muttering about the house, saying it wasn't right. People in town thought he was eccentric, but I always felt there was more to it. Emily nodded, her throat tight. Do you think they really believed the house was angry? Mrs. Palmer hesitated, then sighed. It's hard to say. People can convince themselves of anything when they're scared enough. But Anna, she shook her head. That poor girl. If these entries are true, they might have sent her here thinking they were protecting her. But from what? Emily couldn't answer. The whispers she'd heard echoed in her mind, and she wondered if Anna's voice had somehow lingered, caught between the walls of the house. That evening, Emily returned home with the notebook, her resolve stronger than ever. She needed to know the truth, not just for herself, but for Lucas. Whatever had happened to Anna, she wouldn't let the past haunt her son. Lucas, she called as she walked through the door. Up here, Mom. Emily followed his voice to the second floor, where she found him sitting cross-legged in his room, surrounded by a collection of rocks and trinkets he'd found outside. Guess what? Sam's dad said he can help fix the wobbly stairs. Lucas said, grinning. Emily smiled, grateful for the community that had begun to surround them. That's great, honey. But listen, I need you to promise me something. Lucas tilted his head. What is it? If you hear the whispers again, you need to tell me right away. Don't try to talk to them, and don't go looking for anything, okay? Lucas's smile faded, his brow furrowing. Why? Are they bad? Emily knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. I don't know, sweetheart, but I just want to keep you safe. Okay, Mom, Lucas said, though his curiosity still shone in his eyes. That night, as the house settled into its usual creaks and groans, Emily sat in the living room, the notebook open on her lap. She felt a strange sense of connection to Anna, as if the girl's words were a bridge between the past and the present. The whispers returned, soft and faint, carrying the same desperate plea. Help me. Emily clenched her fists, her heart pounding. She stood, the notebook pressed against her chest, and spoke into the stillness. I'm listening, she whispered, her voice trembling. For a moment, the house was silent. Then, a single word floated through the air, clear and deliberate. Attic. Emily's blood ran cold, but she knew what she had to do. Grabbing a flashlight, She climbed the stairs to the attic once more, the floorboards groaning beneath her feet. As she reached the top, the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in around her. She shone the flashlight across the room, its beam landing on the empty space where the trunk had been. And then, in the corner, she saw it. A faint outline scratched into the floorboards, a small door hidden beneath layers of dust. Her heart raced as she knelt to examine it, the whispers growing louder in her ears. Taking a deep breath, Emily reached for the edges of the hidden door, her hands shaking. Whatever was waiting beneath, she would face it because for the first time, she realized this wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about finding a way to set it free. The attic felt colder than before, as if the air itself had recoiled from Emily's presence. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the small door hidden in the floorboards, its outline faint but deliberate. Dust stirred in the flashlight's beam as she pried at the edges, the wood creaking beneath her touch. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone or something to be watching her. But the attic remained still, cloaked in shadow. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, drawing in a shaky breath. Using the edge of a metal ruler she'd brought from the kitchen, Emily pried the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing a narrow, dark opening barely large enough for a person to crawl through. The smell of damp earth wafted up, mingled with something faintly metallic. Emily gagged, covering her mouth with her hand. She angled the flashlight downward, illuminating a cramped space lined with wooden beams. At first it appeared empty, but then the light caught something, a bundle wrapped in a faded, tattered cloth tucked into the corner. Her breath hitched. She didn't want to move, didn't want to see, but a quiet determination pushed her forward. This was what Anna wanted her to find. Emily reached down, her hand shaking, and carefully pulled the bundle free. The cloth was brittle, flaking as she unwrapped it. Inside, she found a small porcelain doll with one painted eye chipped away. Beside it lay a diary, its cover cracked and worn. Her fingers brushed the diary, and a chill coursed through her body, like static electricity sparking across her skin. She pulled back instinctively, her breath shallow. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around her like a plea. "Help me," they said, the voice clearer than ever. Emily swallowed hard, her fear mingling with a strange resolve. She picked up the diary and quickly backed out of the crawl space, slamming the hidden door shut behind her. Back in the kitchen, Emily sat at the table, the diary and the doll resting in front of her. The house was silent now, the whispers gone, as if satisfied she had done their bidding. Her fingers traced the edges of the diary's cover. She felt an unshakable connection to Anna, a child who had lived in fear and secrecy within these very walls. When she opened the diary, her suspicions deepened. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places, but the entries were hauntingly vivid. November 12th, Papa says I must stay quiet, that I cannot leave this room. He says it is the only way to keep the house calm. Mama cries a lot, but she does not stop him. I feel so alone. Emily's throat tightened. The next few entries were fragmented, filled with descriptions of muffled voices and the growing fear of abandonment. November 18th. They are not coming back. The whispers say they will stay with me, but I do not want them. I want Mama and Papa. I just want to go home. The final entry was little more than a scrawl, the letters jagged and uneven. Why did they leave me here? I am so cold. So cold. Tears blurred Emily's vision as she closed the diary. She thought of Lucas, imagining him feeling this kind of pain and fear. The thought made her chest tighten. Whatever had happened to Anna, Emily now understood the whispers weren't meant to harm her. They were a cry for help, a desperate attempt to be heard after years of silence. The next morning, Emily shared her findings with Mrs. Palmer, who listened intently, her expression grim. "Do you think the Rosewoods truly believe the house could harm them?" Emily asked, setting the diary on the table between them. Mrs. Palmer sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "It's hard to say. Fear can make people do terrible things, even to those they love. Perhaps they thought leaving Anna behind would save them. But why?" Emily pressed. Why would they believe that? Mrs. Palmer hesitated before speaking. There were rumors about that house, stories passed down through the years. Some said the land was cursed. Others claimed the house itself was alive. I never put much stock in it, but the Rosewoods were desperate. And desperation makes people believe in all kinds of things. Emily's stomach churned. She didn't believe in curses or haunted houses, but there was no denying the strange energy in the home. What should I do? Emily asked, her voice soft. Mrs. Palmer reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. You've already done so much, Emily. You've given Anna a voice. Now, you need to find a way to let her rest. That afternoon, Lucas came running into the house with Sam close behind. Both boys were flushed from the cold, their laughter echoing through the halls. Mom, Sam's dad said, he can come over tomorrow to fix the stairs. Lucas announced, his eyes bright with excitement. Emily smiled, her heart lifting at the sight of her son's joy. That's wonderful. Thank you, Sam. The boy grinned. No problem, Mrs. Harper. My dad says it'll only take an hour. After the boys retreated to Lucas's room, Emily stood in the quiet living room, gazing at the diary still sitting on the table. She knew Mrs. Palmer was right. She needed to find a way to bring peace to Anna's spirit. That night, Emily stood in the attic once more, the diary and the doll in her hands. She knelt by the hidden door, her breath visible in the frigid air. I'm sorry, Anna, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm sorry you were left here alone. You didn't deserve that. But I'm here now. I hear you. The attic grew still, the silence thick and heavy. Emily placed the diary and the doll inside the hidden space, arranging them gently. I hope this helps you find peace, she said, tears sliding down her cheeks. You're not forgotten. As she closed the door, a warmth spread through the room, chasing away the cold. Emily stood, her heart lighter than it had been in days. For the first time since moving in, she felt the house truly begin to welcome her. The whispers never returned. But sometimes when Emily passed the attic stairs, she felt a quiet presence, a sense of gratitude lingering in the air. And for the first time, she believed the house could become a home. The following morning, the house was unusually quiet, as if it, too, was resting after the events of the night before. Emily woke to a sense of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. She rolled out of bed and padded into the kitchen, finding Lucas already there, perched at the table with his bowl of cereal. Morning, Mom, he said, a wide grin on his face. Morning, sweetheart. Emily tousled his hair, her heart lighter. Excited about Sam's dad coming over today? Lucas nodded enthusiastically. He said he's bringing his toolbox. I want to help. Emily chuckled. You can be his assistant. Just remember, tools aren't toys. Later that morning, a knock on the door announced David, Sam's father. He stood on the porch, a friendly smile beneath his scruffy beard, holding a heavy toolbox in one hand. Good morning, Emily, he said warmly. Heard you've got some wobbly stairs that need fixing. That's right, Emily replied, stepping aside to let him in. Thanks for doing this. I haven't had a chance to tackle it yet. No problem at all, David said, his gaze sweeping the living room. This house has character. I love old places like this. Emily offered a small smile. It definitely has its quirks. David knelt by the staircase, testing the steps with his hand. Looks like the nails have come loose over time. Shouldn't be hard to fix. As he worked, Lucas hovered nearby, watching intently and peppering him with questions about tools and construction. David answered each one with patience, occasionally letting Lucas hand him a nail or hold a level. Emily stayed close, tidying the living room and listening to their easy banter. She was struck by how natural it all felt, as though David's presence filled some of the lingering emptiness in the house. Done, David announced after about an hour, standing and dusting off his hands. Those stairs should be good as new. Lucas clapped his hands. Thanks, Mr. Sam's dad. David laughed. You're welcome, kiddo. Emily stepped forward, gratitude softening her expression. Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. David nodded. Happy to help. You got a great kid there. He glanced at Lucas, who was already bounding up and down the newly repaired stairs to test them. Emily's smile faltered slightly as a wave of emotion rose within her. He's been through a lot, she admitted quietly. David's expression softened. I can tell, but he's resilient, just like his mom. The words caught Emily off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. After David and Sam left, the house felt brighter. Emily sat in the living room, sipping tea and reflecting on the morning. For weeks, she had been overwhelmed by the weight of the move, the house, and the whispers. But today, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Lucas barreled into the room, clutching the small porcelain doll Emily had returned to the attic the night before. Lucas! Emily gasped. Where did you get that? The attic, he said, frowning. It was sitting on the trunk. I thought you said we were leaving it up there. Emily froze, her tea cooling in her hands. She had placed the doll in the crawl space, along with the diary. It shouldn't have been anywhere near the trunk. Her mind raced as she gently took the doll from Lucas, examining it. It looked exactly the same, but now its chipped eye seemed almost watchful. Did you hear anything while you were up there? She asked cautiously. Lucas shook his head. No, it was quiet. Why? Is something wrong? Emily forced a smile. No, it's fine. I just didn't want you playing in the attic. It's dusty up there. Lucas shrugged, unconcerned. Okay, can I go to Sam's for a bit? Sure. Be back for dinner, Emily said, her voice tight. As soon as Lucas left, she placed the doll back on the table, staring at it as unease prickled at her skin. Had Anna's spirit left the house truly at peace, or was there still more to uncover? That afternoon, Emily returned to Mrs. Palmer's house, clutching the doll once again. Back so soon? Mrs. Palmer asked, raising an eyebrow as she let Emily in. Emily held up the doll. I found this in the attic again. I don't know how it got there. Mrs. Palmer studied the doll, her expression unreadable. Do you think Anna's spirit hasn't moved on? I don't know, Emily admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I thought returning the diary and the doll to the crawl space would bring her peace. But now I'm wondering if I missed something. Mrs. Palmer sighed, setting the doll on the table. Perhaps the house is trying to tell you something else. You've done so much already, Emily, but maybe there's more to Anna's story than you realize. That night, Emily decided to search the attic again. She climbed the stairs with a flashlight, her resolve firm despite the unease crawling up her spine. The attic was cold, the air thick with the same strange energy she had felt before. Emily moved to the trunk, half expecting to find another object waiting for her. But the trunk was empty, just as she had left it. She crouched by the crawl space, hesitating before opening it. Her flashlight illuminated the small, hollow space, but the diary was gone. A chill ran down her spine. Emily sat back on her heels, her mind racing. If the diary and doll had moved, was something guiding them? Or someone? Before she could puzzle it out further, a sound broke the silence, a faint, muffled cry, like the sob of a child. Anna, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The cry stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft thud coming from the corner of the attic. Emily turned, her flashlight beams sweeping the space, and saw a small wooden box sitting in the shadows. Her heart pounding, she approached it slowly. The box was old, its surface scratched and worn. Emily opened it carefully, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The letters were addressed to Anna from someone named Lily. Back in the kitchen, Emily sat at the table, the letters spread before her. Each one was filled with warm, loving words, signed by someone who seemed to care deeply for Anna. But there was a recurring theme in the letters, a promise to take Anna away from the house and keep her safe. The final letter was different, its tone desperate. Anna, I'll come for you tomorrow night. Please be ready. We'll leave before they can stop us. Emily's breath caught. Had someone tried to save Anna, only to fail? Her chest tightened as a new determination filled her. If Lily had cared enough to make that promise, then Anna deserved to have her story fully understood and her memory honored. Emily didn't know how she would do it yet, but she would find out the truth. For Anna, for Lucas, and for the house that had begun to feel like home. Emily spent the next morning carefully rereading the letters she had discovered in the attic. Each one painted a vivid picture of a deep bond between Anna and Lily, who seemed to be an older sister or perhaps a trusted caretaker. The letters were filled with reassurance, promises to take Anna away from her troubling home life, and details about a plan that would allow them to leave without being caught. But the final letter, the one promising escape, was unfinished. It ended abruptly, the ink smudged as if the writer had stopped mid-thought. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Lily had tried to rescue Anna and failed. The missing diary and the reappearance of the doll seemed to hint at unfinished business, something Anna or the house itself needed her to uncover. Lucas wandered into the kitchen, still groggy from sleep. "Mom, why are you staring at that box?" he asked, climbing into a chair. Emily smiled faintly. "Just trying to figure out a mystery, sweetie." Lucas perked up. "What kind of mystery?" "The kind that involves someone who lived here a long time ago," Emily said carefully, not wanting to overwhelm him with the details. Lucas grinned. "Can I help?" Emily hesitated but nodded. "Sure. But first, eat your breakfast." After dropping Lucas off at Sam's house to play, Emily decided it was time to investigate further. Mrs. Palmer had told her about the town's historical society, which operated out of the library basement. If anyone knew about Lily or the Rosewood family, it would be the volunteers there. When Emily arrived, the librarian greeted her warmly and directed her downstairs. The basement smelled of old paper and faint mildew, its walls lined with shelves of archives, photographs, and records. A man in his 60s sat at a cluttered desk, squinting at a ledger through thick glasses. He looked up as Emily approached. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound confident. "I'm Emily Harper. I just moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. I was hoping to learn more about its history." The man smiled kindly and gestured to the chair across from him. "You've come to the right place. I'm Walter. That house is quite a story, though not all of it's pleasant." Emily nodded, setting the letters on the desk. "I found these in the attic. They're from someone named Lily, written to a girl named Anna. Do you know anything about them?" Walter's expression grew thoughtful as he picked up one of the letters, scanning its contents. "Lily. Yes, I remember her name coming up in some old articles. She was a housemaid for the Rosewoods, very devoted to Anna. There was talk that she tried to take Anna away from the family, claiming they were unfit. But nothing ever came of it. What happened to her?" Emily asked, leaning forward. Walter sighed. "She vanished around the same time the Rosewoods left town. Some folks believe she ran away, while others suspected foul play. No one knows for sure." Emily's heart sank. "Do you have any records about the Rosewoods' departure?" Walter nodded and rifled through a drawer, pulling out a folder. He spread its contents across the desk: old property deeds, police reports, and newspaper clippings. One article caught Emily's attention. It was dated just after the Rosewoods had left town, and the headline read, "Housemaid Lily Woodward missing. Foul play suspected." The article detailed Lily's disappearance and included a grainy photograph of her. Emily's breath caught as she stared at the image. Lily's face was kind, her eyes filled with a quiet determination that mirrored her letters. "She tried to help Anna," Emily murmured. Walter nodded gravely. "She did, but it seems she got too close to the truth about that house." That afternoon, Emily returned home with a new sense of urgency. She was certain now that Anna and Lily's stories were intertwined, their fates sealed by whatever darkness had consumed the Rosewood family. "Mom, you're back," Lucas called from the living room, where he and Sam were building a fort out of cushions. Emily smiled, ruffling his hair. "Having fun?" "Yeah. Sam says his dad can help fix the loose boards in the porch tomorrow." "Tell him I said thank you," Emily replied, her heart warming at the thought of David's continued kindness. Sam left shortly after, and Emily sat with Lucas at the kitchen table. She pulled out one of the letters and showed it to him. "This was written by someone named Lily," she explained. "She cared a lot about Anna, the girl who used to live in this house." Lucas frowned, his small fingers tracing the faded ink. "Did she take Anna away?" Emily hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. "She tried, but something went wrong. I'm trying to figure out what happened, so we can help Anna rest." Lucas's eyes widened. "You mean the whispers?" "Yes," Emily said softly. "I think they're Anna's way of asking for help." Lucas looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's figure it out together." That evening, Emily returned to the attic, this time with Lucas by her side. She wanted to include him in the search, knowing his curiosity and sharp eyes might uncover something she'd missed. They scoured the space together, opening every trunk and box. Lucas found an old map of the house's floor plan, while Emily unearthed more faded photographs of the Rosewood family. "Mom, look!" Lucas exclaimed, pointing to a corner of the attic where the floorboards looked newer than the rest. Emily's heart raced as she approached. She knelt and ran her fingers along the seams, finding small nails that had been driven hastily into the wood. "Help me find something to pry this up," she said. Lucas handed her a flathead screwdriver, and together they worked to lift the boards. Beneath them was a shallow cavity filled with dirt and a second, smaller wooden box. Emily opened it carefully, revealing a stack of documents wrapped in wax paper. The top document was a letter from Lily, but this one wasn't addressed to Anna. It was a plea to the authorities, detailing the abuse Anna had suffered at the hands of her parents and their plans to leave her behind. Emily's hands shook as she read the words. Lily had known the truth all along. She had tried to save Anna, but the family had silenced her before she could act. Lucas tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, what does it mean?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "It means we found the truth, and now we can make sure no one forgets what happened here." That night, Emily sat in the living room with the letters and documents spread before her. She felt a sense of purpose blooming within her. Anna and Lily's voices had been silenced for too long, but now their story could be told. Lucas snuggled beside her, his head resting on her shoulder. "Mom!" "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Anna's happy now?" Emily kissed his forehead, her voice steady. "I think she's closer to peace, and we're going to make sure she's remembered the way she deserves to be." For the first time, Emily felt the house settle around her, not with its usual creaks and groans, but with a quiet, comforting stillness. The whispers were gone, replaced by the warmth of something that finally felt like home. The house felt different after Emily and Lucas uncovered the truth about Anna and Lily. The stillness that replaced the whispers wasn't eerie or oppressive, it was peaceful, almost as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for decades. Yet Emily knew their work wasn't over. The letters and documents they'd uncovered couldn't stay hidden. They needed to be shared, to bring closure not only to Anna's story, but to the community that had quietly lived alongside the shadows of the old Victorian house. The next morning, Emily sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Across from her, Lucas was finishing his cereal, swinging his legs in his chair. "Mom, are you going to show the letters to anyone?" he asked, his tone casual but curious. Emily nodded. "I think so. It's important that people know what happened to Anna and Lily. They deserve to be remembered." Lucas tilted his head. "Like tell Mrs. Palmer? Or the library people?" "Something like that," Emily said with a small smile. "But first, I think we should talk to someone who can help us figure out the best way to share their story." That afternoon, Emily reached out to David, knowing he had lived in Willow Creek his entire life and might have insights about the Rosewoods or their place in local history. He arrived at the house a short while later, a thoughtful look on his face, as Emily laid out the letters and documents for him to read. "These are incredible," David said after a long pause. He held one of Lily's letters delicately, as though it might crumble in his hands. "It's heartbreaking, but it's also important. People in this town need to hear about this." Emily nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of a letter. "I thought so too. I just wasn't sure how to start." David leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Well, the town has a historical society. They've been collecting and preserving local stories for years. I think they'd be the perfect place to begin. And if you want, I can introduce you to some of the members." Emily exhaled, relief washing over her. "That would be wonderful. Thank you, David." David smiled warmly. "It's the least I can do. You've brought a voice to a part of this town's past that people forgot or maybe chose to ignore. That's no small thing." Lucas, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Can I come too? I want to tell them about Anna." Emily glanced at David, who grinned. "I think that's a great idea. You've been a big part of this, Lucas." Lucas beamed with pride, and Emily's heart swelled. Later that week, Emily and Lucas accompanied David to a meeting of the Willow Creek Historical Society, held in a small, sunlit room above the library. The group consisted of about a dozen people, most of them older residents who greeted David warmly and welcomed Emily and Lucas with curiosity. Emily shared what she had discovered in the attic: the letters, the diary, and the documents outlining Lily's efforts to protect Anna. As she spoke, the room grew quiet, the weight of the story settling over everyone. When she finished, the society's president, a woman named Clara, leaned forward with an intense expression. "This is a remarkable story," Clara said. "Tragic, but remarkable. Thank you for bringing this to us, Emily. I think we should do something to ensure Anna and Lily are remembered properly." Another member nodded. "Maybe we could host an exhibit at the library. Something that tells their story and preserves these documents for future generations." "I like that idea," Clara agreed, turning to Emily. "What do you think?" Emily hesitated, overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. "I think that would be wonderful. I just want their story to be told." Lucas raised his hand, drawing amused smiles from the group. "Yes, young man?" Clara asked. "Can we put a picture of Anna in the exhibit so people can see her?" Lucas asked earnestly. Emily smiled at her son, her chest tightening with pride. "That's a great idea, Lucas." As plans for the exhibit began to take shape, Emily noticed a shift in herself. The fear and anxiety that had gripped her since moving into the house were slowly being replaced by a sense of purpose. For the first time, she felt like she and Lucas truly belonged in Willow Creek. Her neighbors seemed to notice the change too. Mrs. Palmer dropped by more often, bringing baked goods and chatting about the progress of the exhibit. Sam's family invited Emily and Lucas over for dinner, and David became a regular presence at the house, helping with small repairs and sharing stories about the town's history. One evening, as Emily and Lucas worked together to prepare dinner, she glanced at him and realized how much he had grown since they'd arrived. His laughter came more easily now, and the weight she'd seen in his eyes after the move was gone. "Mom," Lucas said, breaking her thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Anna and Lily would be happy if they knew we're telling their story?" Emily set down her knife and knelt beside him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "I think they'd be very happy, and I think they'd be proud of you, Lucas. You've been so brave and kind through all of this." Lucas smiled, his cheeks flushing. "I just wanted to help." "You did," Emily said softly. "You helped more than you know." The exhibit opened 2 weeks later, drawing a crowd of townspeople to the library. The space was filled with photographs, letters, and objects from the Rosewood house, arranged to tell the story of Anna and Lily's lives. At the center of the display was a portrait of Anna, taken from the faded photograph inside her locket. Beside it was a plaque that read, "In memory of Anna Rosewood and Lily Woodward, a story of love and courage." Emily stood with Lucas, her hand resting on his shoulder as they watched visitors move through the exhibit. She saw their reactions: tears, hushed whispers, and quiet nods of understanding, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. David approached them, his smile warm and genuine. "You've done something incredible, Emily. This exhibit will touch a lot of people." Emily looked at Lucas, who was beaming with pride, and then back at David. "We all did. I couldn't have done it without this community." As the evening wound down, Emily and Lucas walked home under a canopy of stars. The house came into view, its silhouette no longer looming but inviting, like an old friend waiting to welcome them back. When they stepped inside, the warmth of the home enveloped them, and Emily felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. They weren't just living in Willow Creek anymore, they were part of it. And for the first time in years, Emily knew they had found a place where they truly belonged. The house on Maple Street no longer felt like a mystery to be solved. Instead, it had become a home, a place where Lucas laughed freely and where Emily found herself at peace. The whispers were gone, and the unease that once lingered in every corner had been replaced with warmth. Yet, as Emily sat at the kitchen table one evening, staring at the locket she had placed there, she knew there was one last thing she needed to do. The exhibit at the library had given Anna and Lily's story a voice, but Emily felt a quiet pull, as if something unfinished still tied her to the attic and its secrets. Lucas bounded into the room, his hair messy from playing outside with Sam. He paused when he saw the locket. "Are you thinking about Anna again, Mom?" he asked, climbing into a chair across from her. Emily smiled softly. "A little. I feel like we've done so much to honor her and Lily, but there's something I can't quite let go of." "Like what?" Lucas asked, his voice curious. Emily hesitated, her gaze dropping to the locket. "I think it's time to return this. Not to the attic, but to Anna's true resting place, wherever that might be." Lucas tilted his head. "But we don't know where she is." Emily reached across the table, taking his small hand in hers. "That's what I'm going to figure out. I think Anna deserves that much." The next morning, Emily returned to the Historical Society with David by her side. Clara greeted them warmly, ushering them into a small back room filled with maps and records. "Emily," Clara began, "what brings you back so soon? Is there more to Anna's story you've uncovered?" Emily shook her head. "Not exactly. But I need to know, was Anna ever found? Did anyone ever search the property for her after the Rosewoods left?" Clara's expression grew somber. There were rumors of a search, but no formal records. The family left in such a hurry, and people were quick to move on. It's possible no one looked as deeply as they should have. David frowned. "You're saying she could still be somewhere on the property?" "It's possible," Clara admitted. "That house has so many nooks and crannies. If the family wanted to hide something or someone, they might have succeeded." Emily's chest tightened. "Then I need to check again. If Anna is there, she deserves to be laid to rest properly." Clara nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll help in any way I can. Let me know what you need." That afternoon, David joined Emily and Lucas at the house, bringing a set of tools and a sense of determination. Together, they combed through the property, starting with the attic. Emily had thought she knew every inch of the space, but with David's trained eye, they uncovered a second hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard near the trunk. Inside, they found a small wooden box filled with fragments of a porcelain tea set and a folded piece of fabric that might have once been a dress. "It's like she left pieces of herself behind," Emily murmured, her fingers brushing the fabric. Lucas crouched beside her, his brow furrowed. "Do you think she was trying to hide these? Or maybe these were things that meant something to her," David suggested. "Things she wanted to keep close." They moved their search outside, combing through the overgrown backyard. Lucas ran ahead, his small hands pulling at vines and loose boards from an old garden shed. "Mom," he called suddenly, his voice sharp with excitement. "Come look at this." Emily and David hurried to the shed, where Lucas was crouched near the base of a crumbling stone wall. He pointed to a section where the ground had sunk slightly, creating a small hollow. "What is it, Lucas?" Emily asked, kneeling beside him. "It feels soft," Lucas said, digging into the dirt with his hands. "Like there's something under here." David grabbed a small spade from his toolbox and began digging carefully. The soil was loose, as if it had been disturbed long ago, and within minutes, the edge of a wooden box emerged. Emily's breath caught as David lifted the box free and set it gently on the ground. The wood was weathered, the edges splintered with age, but it held together. With trembling hands, Emily opened the box. Inside was a small collection of items: a ribbon, a pair of children's shoes, and a faded photograph of Anna and Lily, their arms wrapped around each other, smiling. Tucked beneath the photo was a letter written in Lily's handwriting. "To whoever finds this, Anna was the light of my life, and I promised to protect her. I failed her, but I hope that one day someone will remember her the way she deserves to be remembered. Please do not forget her. She was so much more than what happened to her. She was brave, kind, and full of love." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she folded the letter carefully. "She wanted someone to remember Anna," she whispered. "And now we can." That evening, Emily and Lucas stood in the backyard, the box placed carefully on a small table. They had decided to bury it beneath the old oak tree, creating a quiet memorial for Anna and Lily. As they worked, Mrs. Palmer arrived, carrying a bundle of flowers. "I heard what you found," she said softly, placing the flowers beside the box. "It's a beautiful thing you're doing." David joined them, bringing a smooth, flat stone he had etched with the names Anna Rosewood and Lily Woodward, along with the words "Forever Remembered." Lucas held Emily's hand tightly as they placed the box into the ground, each of them adding a handful of soil until it was covered. The stone was set in place, the flowers arranged around it in a simple, heartfelt tribute. Emily took a deep breath, her heart heavy but full. "We did it, Anna," she said softly. "You're not forgotten anymore." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the backyard, Emily felt a sense of closure wash over her. The house no longer felt like a place of secrets, it was a place of healing, a home that had found its voice again. Lucas tugged on her hand, smiling up at her. "Do you think Anna and Lily are happy now?" Emily knelt to hug him tightly, her voice steady. "I think they are, and I think they're proud of us, too." As the stars began to fill the sky, Emily stood with Lucas, Mrs. Palmer, and David, their small group united by an act of kindness that had finally brought peace to the house and to the family that now called it home. The morning after the backyard memorial, the house on Maple Street felt alive in a way Emily hadn't thought possible. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching the dust motes as they danced lazily in the air. There was a warmth to the space, now a sense of peace that hadn't existed when she and Lucas first arrived. Emily stood in the kitchen, making pancakes while Lucas set the table. His movements were light and carefree, a stark contrast to the hesitant boy who had walked through the door weeks ago. She couldn't help but smile as she watched him hum softly to himself. "Mom, can I put extra syrup on mine today?" he asked, glancing at her with a hopeful grin. "Sure," Emily said, flipping the last pancake onto a plate. "It's a special day, after all." "What's so special?" Lucas asked, sitting down eagerly. Emily placed the plate in front of him and ruffled his hair. "Because today is the first day we're starting fresh. No more mysteries, no more whispers, just us, making this house a home." Lucas nodded, his eyes bright. "And Sam's coming over later to help me build our fort in the yard." Emily chuckled. "Sounds like a perfect way to spend the day." Later that morning, David stopped by with a toolbox, offering to help fix the back fence. He found Emily in the yard, pulling weeds near the oak tree where Anna and Lily's memorial lay. "Good morning," he called, leaning on the fence. "Looks like you've got your hands full." Emily looked up, brushing dirt from her hands. "Just trying to make the yard livable. I didn't realize how much work it needed." David smiled. "That's what neighbors are for. I'll start on the fence, and after that, maybe I can help with the garden beds." Emily felt a flicker of gratitude. In just a few weeks, David had become a steady presence in her and Lucas's lives, offering support in quiet but meaningful ways. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice warm. He nodded, his expression kind. "You've done a lot for this house and for this town. It's nice to see it coming together." As the day unfolded, the yard buzzed with activity. Sam and Lucas built their fort near the edge of the property, using scrap wood and leftover nails David had provided. Mrs. Palmer stopped by with a pitcher of lemonade, sitting with Emily on the porch as they watched the boys play. "This place has changed so much since you moved in," Mrs. Palmer remarked, her voice thoughtful. Emily nodded, glancing at the house. "It doesn't feel like the same place. It's lighter somehow, like the weight it was carrying is finally gone." Mrs. Palmer smiled. "That's because you gave it life again. Houses hold memories, but they also hold hope. You've given this one a future." Emily looked at her neighbor, warmth spreading through her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you. Your kindness made all the difference when I didn't know where to start." Mrs. Palmer patted Emily's hand. "That's what neighbors do, dear. We take care of each other." As the afternoon turned into evening, the house grew quiet again. Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch, worn out from a day of building and playing. Emily covered him with a blanket and stood for a moment, watching his peaceful expression. She walked out to the backyard, where David was packing up his tools under the soft glow of the porch light. He glanced up as she approached, his smile easy. "All done," he said, gesturing to the sturdy new fence. "It looks great," Emily replied. "Thank you, David, for everything." He shrugged, his expression warm. "You don't have to thank me. You've built something special here, Emily. It's been a privilege to help." Emily hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "I wasn't sure we'd ever feel at home here," she admitted. "But now, it feels like we've always belonged." David stepped closer, his gaze steady. That's because you've made it a home. For Lucas, for yourself, and even for this town. You've brought something good to all of us. For a moment, they stood in the quiet, the weight of his words settling between them. Emily felt a warmth rise in her chest, not just gratitude, but something deeper, something hopeful. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The fear and uncertainty she'd felt when she first arrived had been replaced with a quiet strength. The house was no longer a place of shadows and secrets, it was a sanctuary, a symbol of the life she was building for herself and Lucas. The whispers were gone, but their message remained. They had taught her to listen, to trust her instincts, and to believe in the power of love and kindness to heal even the deepest wounds. As she drifted off to sleep, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The next morning, Lucas bounded into her room, holding a piece of paper. "Mom, look what I made!" he exclaimed, climbing onto the bed. Emily sat up, taking the paper from his hands. It was a drawing of their house, surrounded by flowers and trees, with the words "Our Happy Home" written across the top in bright, colorful letters. "It's beautiful, Lucas," Emily said, pulling him into a hug. "It's exactly how I feel about this place now." Lucas grinned. "Do you think Anna and Lily would like it too?" Emily smiled, her heart full. "I think they'd love it, and I think they'd be happy knowing their story helped make this house what it is today." As they headed downstairs to start the day, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The house on Maple Street had been a place of mystery and sorrow, but now it was a place of hope, resilience, and love, a home where new memories would be made and where the past would always be honored. And as Emily watched Lucas run outside to play, his laughter filling the air, she knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. If this story inspired you, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Together, let's celebrate the power of kindness, resilience, and new beginnings. Thank you for watching.